Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening, and welcome to our live stream event featuring our ACSCAN Ohio Health Policy Speaker Series. We knew that tonight's topic relating to the COVID-19 vaccination in cancer patients would be of great interest to not only our volunteer advocates across the state, but also to many of our partners. And so that is why we are live streaming this evening's event, and we're so pleased that you're taking a few minutes to be with us tonight. We're going to bring you great perspectives from a few different speakers about COVID-19 vaccination and what cancer patients and survivors should keep in mind. And that's really what the Health Policy Speaker Series is all about, and why we designed this recurring event here in ACSCAN Ohio to bring our partners and our volunteer advocates trusted information about emerging public health issues that often sit at the intersection of oncology and public policy. We want to keep you informed of the latest happening on these topics and many others, some of them not even related to oncology care. And that's what tonight's event will do, is bring you some great content. We do want to thank our series sponsor, Guardant Health, for their support of this series. And be sure to join us next month for our event on June 17th, where we'll look at some of the exciting tools Guardant Health is bringing to the fight against cancer. And you can register for next month's event by visiting fightcancer.org/OH series. Again, fightcancer.org/OH series. But let's get to tonight's discussion about COVID-19 vaccinations and the cancer community. We're going to hear some brief presentations from three folks tonight. Julie Turner, who is a cancer advocate in West Central Ohio, Bob Weber from Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center, and Dr. Laura Dean, a breast radiologist at Cleveland Clinic. But let's start with Julie Turner. Julie is one of ACSCAN's very own advocates, and we're proud to have her with us. Julie is a cancer survivor who's going to share a bit about the vaccine and why it's so important to her, and talk a little bit about the advocacy work that ACSCAN has undertaken in recent weeks and months to make sure that cancer patients are prioritized. So Julie, thanks for joining us this evening, and let me turn it over to you.
Good evening, everyone. As Brian said, I'm Julie Turner. I live in Vandalia, Ohio. I am a long-term supporter of the American Cancer Society and been a cancer advocate for some 16 years. I am a stage 3 cancer survivor who was treated in 1975. Do the math, that means I'm a 45-year survivor. And I had a very invasive brand new cocktail of chemotherapy that was used to treat my cancer. Treatments left me without a spleen to filter, much scar tissue on major organs, and an immune system that was compromised. I even am dealing with heart issues due to extensive radiation. So I knew from the beginning of the pandemic that I was in a fragile state. No need to seek medical confirmation, but of course I did. My general practitioner through the University of Cincinnati, who I'm so grateful to have, Dr. Michelle Erickson, specializes in cancer survivors. So the lion's share of her patient list is all cancer survivors. She confirmed to me that I should be very careful. I should follow CDC recommendation measures, and I should get the vaccine as soon as it was available. She told me that I was not more likely to contract COVID, but I was less likely to be able to fight it if I did contract it. So when the medical professionals and frontline workers were getting the vaccines, I reached out to her, and she put me on what she called a UC waiting list. And she called me one day in February and said, if you can get to Cincinnati in 90 minutes, you can receive a leftover injection. And folks, I live 75 minutes from UC. So we scooted down I-75 and I received the vaccination. So as a cancer advocate with ACSCAN, my thoughts quickly shifted to my brothers and sisters who are cancer patients and survivors. I had been so lucky and had pushed the envelope to secure potentially life-saving interventions. But how could I help those other cancer patients and survivors? In a very close time frame, Ohio ACSCAN volunteers we're also realizing that we needed to act. We knew that cancer patients were at a greater risk of severe, life-threatening consequences of COVID. We felt that patients should have the same priority as other chronic, life-threatening conditions. We wanted Ohio to follow the CDC guidelines, as we were hearing from cancer patients and survivors who were confused and scared. Our grassroots volunteers activated to ask Governor DeWine to include cancer patients and survivors in Group 1C of the prioritization, regardless of their age. Our volunteers quickly mobilized and sent over 245 messages to the governor, and we took to social media. We made our voices heard for cancer patients because that's what we do. We take action. We may or may not receive immediate results, but the important result is that we've been heard. And when elected officials hear just one call, they may dismiss us. But when they hear 245 calls, you know we've made an impact. We're going to activate this army again in the coming days. Our volunteers may need to take action against what we think is a bad bill that's been introduced in the Ohio House of Representatives. It's House Bill 248. It would prevent any employer, nonprofit, healthcare system, actually anyone, from requiring vaccinations as a condition of service or employment. This would include COVID-19 vaccinations, and it would permit anyone to opt out of a vaccination for any reason. So for cancer patients or for survivors like me, that's very concerning because we have compromised immune systems. If the staff in a doctor's office, at a grocery, at a school, or even at our workplace has to comply with this requirement, we could be a greater risk, and that's a problem to me. The American Cancer Society Hope Lodge in Cleveland provides services to cancer patients in active treatment. This Hope Lodge may not be able to require vaccinations at its facility, undermining the safety and security of immunocompromised cancer patients who rely on that Hope Lodge for a safe place during their treatment stay. The bottom line is vaccinations are a critical part of protecting public health, especially for cancer patients and survivors. And undermining immunizations is bad for public health policy. So stay tuned, because in the coming days, we will be doing our part as advocates to educate our lawmakers about this important House Bill 248 and its impact on cancer patients and survivors. Thank you very much, folks.
Well, thank you, Julie. Thank you for playing this part tonight, but also for your advocacy all the time, and particularly for the advocacy this spring. COVID-19 was one of those things, and specifically the COVID-19 vaccination was one of those things we didn't necessarily have plans to engage on, and we didn't think we'd have to ramp up and activate our advocates. But when it push came to shove, we realized cancer patients weren't being prioritized, and we're appreciative of the role you played in making that voice heard. So
my pleasure. As
you say, stay tuned, and there's much more advocacy to come. Well, thank you, Julie. Let's move now to Robert Weber. For the sake of time here, I'm not going to read his full biography, but suffice to say, we have one of the preeminent experts on vaccination in the state here tonight. Robert Weber is currently an administrator for pharmacy services at the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center, an assistant dean for medical center affairs at the Ohio State University College of Pharmacy. I'll also note, as I think he may note later on this evening, he is a cancer survivor, so he understands this fight and what it's all about. So, Bob, thank you for being with us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and welcome, everyone. Yes, I am a cancer survivor, and this whole issue has been very personal to me, because obviously when COVID started, I was very nervous myself. I was very nervous about getting sick. I was very nervous about friends of mine getting sick who have had cancer. So this is a very personal issue to me, and actually administering and talking to people about vaccines is a very important mission of my practice. So I really appreciate being here tonight. As you said, I am a cancer survivor, colon cancer survivor, and having cancer can be stressful, obviously, and COVID-19 can be overwhelming. So hopefully our format tonight is a quick review by me of vaccines and its implications to cancer patients, along with a quick Q&A period. So again, thank you for being here tonight. Do I go page? Am I sharing the screen? Am I sharing the slides? Oh, it's not working. It was working before. Try this. Lauren, can you assist me here? It's not quite working here.
Your slides are up on the slide. Do you want to try moving it down and maybe it will shift in advance?
My slides where now? I'm sorry.
It is up on the screen.
Okay, so I'm pressing page down on my computer, which worked before, and it's not working now. So let's see here. I apologize.
No, you're okay. Maybe try unsharing it and then resharing it again.
Okay. Okay, I apologize. Okay, and then it's still not working. Well, I apologize. I'm usually pretty good with technology, but I will just go ahead and speak if that's okay, Lauren.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Okay, again, I'm sorry, everyone. What I'll do tonight is I'll review some key points about the vaccines and how they work. I'll talk about some of the important points you all need to consider as cancer patients, but hopefully I can dispel and clarify some misconceptions, hopefully also dispel some myths about the vaccine so that you can make the best decision for you about vaccines. And truly, I believe that vaccines will certainly make a difference in your life as a cancer patient. I've been practicing pharmacy for around 40 years. As you know, I'm a cancer survivor. I run the pharmacy operations at the Wexner Medical Center. I have a unique view on this in that not only am I a cancer survivor, but I've administered over 3,000 COVID vaccines, and I've administered COVID vaccines to cancer patients. And so I've had lots of conversations with cancer patients about the vaccine, some of their fears and questions, and hopefully we can answer some of those tonight. The COVID vaccines essentially work in two separate ways. There is the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine that essentially duplicate the spike protein on the coronavirus vaccine. On the coronavirus. The coronavirus spike protein is the compound that provides the infectious capabilities of the coronavirus. That's what causes the infections. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccines duplicate the spike protein in your body and as a result create immune antibodies to it, and as a result you are then immune to the virus. The J&J vaccine works a bit differently in that it carries the DNA. Oh, here it is. Perfect. Do you want me to just say next slide or?
Yeah, I think that'll work. Brian was able to share it. So go for it. Yep.
Thank you very much, Brian. So as you can see from this slide is that the spike protein is the infectious part of the coronavirus. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccine duplicates the spike protein using mRNA technology and forms antibodies so that if you're exposed to COVID, it basically kills the COVID virus. Your body kills the COVID virus. The J&J vaccine carries the spike protein DNA via a harmless virus called an adenovirus. This adenovirus then creates an immune response to the spike protein so that when you are exposed to COVID, your body kills the virus. There's one thing very important about these vaccines is they're very highly effective in preventing two things, in preventing you from getting COVID, but most importantly, and this is really important for cancer patients, everyone, is that it prevents serious COVID disease and death from serious COVID disease. So the reason why we get vaccines necessarily is not to prevent getting sick from a virus, but to prevent dying and getting super sick from a virus. Next slide, Brian, thank you. For all of us to be safe from COVID-19, it is necessary for most of us to either receive the vaccine or to be infected with COVID-19. So once we reach what's called herd immunity, we hopefully will be able to relax some of the health orders within Ohio. And the slide actually should be updated that all Ohioans greater than 12 are welcome to receive the vaccine, specifically the Pfizer vaccine. So the key to vaccine effectiveness is to achieve herd immunity, which is really a call to action for all of us to become vaccinated. Next slide, Brian. I get this question at least once a week. I'm often asked, and it's really worth taking a few minutes to talk about this. In general, vaccines, this vaccine was not developed too quickly. In fact, the technology for mRNA has been available for many years. The reason this vaccine was so quickly developed is because pharmaceutical companies did not have to worry about money to be able to pay for clinical trials. So the funding by the government facilitated money to quickly put together clinical trials, and importantly, no step in the evaluation of the vaccine safety or effectiveness was skipped. As you can see from this slide, the longest phase in drug development is phase 2, 3 in manufacturing. That's normally 5 years. For the COVID vaccine, it took 6 months. The reason why that is because there was plenty of money from the government to fund the analysis, to fund the patient recruitment, and a lot of other issues that often take longer because of financial resources. So the government was very, very helpful in funding these trials, which really accelerated the approval of the vaccine. So please remember that this vaccine, the evaluation of the safety and efficacy was not done too quickly. The process was accelerated, but the same amount of focus was placed on actually evaluating the safety of the vaccine. Next slide, please. So I'll take a moment to address some of the questions and concerns for patients with cancer. In general, most patients with cancer should receive the COVID vaccine. There are a few exceptions, and I would recommend that you speak with your physician if you're in active treatment. Folks that have received a bone marrow transplantation, folks that are on high-dose chemotherapy, most likely should wait to receive the vaccine. But patients in survivorship and patients even in active treatment should receive the vaccine. The American Cancer Society recommends that generally most patients should receive the vaccine. There is no effect on chemotherapy or immunotherapy from the vaccines, and Dr. Dean can comment later on vaccine effect on scans, for example. In patients with lymphedema, this is a common question that I see in the vaccine clinic. Patients with lymphedema should receive the shot in the opposite arm. If a patient has lymphedema in both arms, I have given the shot in the thigh. It's painless, it's very effective. You can receive a COVID vaccine in your thigh. So if you've got lymphedema in both arms, you certainly can receive it in the thigh. In terms of allergies, allergies are something to consider. If you are allergic to polyethylene glycol or polysorbate, you should confer with your physician prior to receiving the COVID vaccine. However, if you did have an infusion reaction, for example, with paclitaxel in the past, it is not a contraindication of getting the vaccine. You can receive the vaccine safely if you've had these minor hypersensitivity reactions to various chemotherapy. So early on, when we were giving COVID vaccines, we were telling folks that they couldn't get the vaccine if they had hypersensitivity reactions, but they can. So please remember that as well. Next slide. Brian? So if you haven't gotten your vaccine, before you get your vaccine, make sure you drink plenty of water. Make sure that you inform the vaccinator if you have an issue with getting shots. We can give you your shot in any way possible. We have folks that lay down. We have folks that, have their pets come in, those sorts of things. And you will have to wait for 15 to 30 minutes, but please tell the vaccinator if you have any issues with allergy, itching, swelling, not feeling well, etc. But getting a shot is seamless. It's very quick. I try to give vaccines very quickly to make sure that folks are comfortable. But please, if you're not comfortable getting shots, let the vaccinator know, and the vaccinator can really make it a really comfortable process for you as well. Next slide, Brian. Vaccine myths. I'd like to just spend a few minutes and talk about vaccine myths, and you've probably heard about these and obviously talked about them as well with your friends. Vaccines were developed in a very systematic and thoughtful way for COVID. Again, there's been lots out there about infertility, which it hasn't been proven. There have been reports of microchips and Bill Gates controlling the supply chain, and frankly, that's an urban legend. There's nothing in the COVID vaccine that tracks anybody anywhere. Bill Gates is not controlling the supply chain. There is more than enough vaccine. There are over 400 million doses available. So there's plenty of vaccine for our population. Pregnancy and breastfeeding, they've shown that antibodies are formed and actually passed to the fetus as well as the baby through the breast milk. So COVID vaccines are very safe in pregnancy and breastfeeding. But importantly, COVID is a very serious disease, specifically in patients with cancer. And the predictability of who gets very sick from COVID and who doesn't, it's just not predictable. And so please don't take the risk of not getting sick by not getting the vaccine. It's very important that folks get the vaccine because serious COVID disease in cancer patients is very, very serious. Next slide, Brian. So this is a picture of our vaccine clinic. This is me administering one of the first vaccines in the country, December 14th. Our vaccine clinics are open at the Schottenstein Center. They're open at the Jesse Owens North Recreation Center at the university. But my story about the vaccine is that I was entered in a lottery on December the 16th and was chosen. I've never won anything else in my life, but I was chosen from a group of vaccinators after a vaccine clinic to get the vaccine. So I got the vaccine very early, and I was grateful to get the vaccine. And then hopefully I've just touched on some things here tonight that will have you thinking about the vaccine. Hopefully, if you've gotten the vaccine, that's great. We really still recommend that folks are careful about how they go about their daily activities until the caseload goes down. But I really appreciate talking to you tonight and glad to answer any questions after Dr. Dean speaks. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bob. I appreciate that, and thanks for walking us through some of those ideas and how this came to be. And it's really quite a feat what we're undertaking right now in this country to get so many folks vaccinated and to see the scientific process move at the speed at which it has. I'm glad to hear you won the vaccine lottery, which these days in Ohio means something a little bit different, as I think we're just a couple of days away from the Vax-A-Million drawing. So if that's not even more incentive for folks to get vaccinated, I don't know what is. Let's talk a little bit. I want to bring in Dr. Dean if we can. And we'll talk a little bit about some more of the side effects. And Dr. Dean, thank you for joining us. As we have a brief introduction, Dr. Dean is a radiologist at the Cleveland Clinic, specializes in breast imaging. And so thanks for being here. I guess I want to start before we talk a little bit about some of the side effects some patients have seen. if you could just, we're now 1+ year into this, and it's taken a toll on everyone and changed the way we've done everything in society, including the way we provide medical care to folks. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit just about your experience and what it's been like caring for patients during the pandemic.
Absolutely. Well, Brian, thank you so much for having me. I think this is such an important event, and I'm certainly happy to be here and give my perspective and hopefully answer some of those outstanding questions that are still flying around. My perspective, just to kind of put everything into perspective for the whole scope of the pandemic, I am a breast radiologist, which means that I'm a clinical radiologist. So I'm, of course, interpreting the scans behind the scenes, but I also see my patients and I interact quite a bit with my patients. I'm very involved in their care. I'm a proceduralist, so I do a lot of procedures and biopsies on my patients. I call cancer patients with their diagnoses, and so I am really very involved with my patients in the breast center. The breast center in my institution did actually not close during any of COVID, so we've remained open throughout the entirety of the pandemic, which I think is really, really critical. And it's so important that we're able to care for our patients in that way. It's certainly been a learning curve. Every aspect of our lives has changed throughout the COVID pandemic. That's at work, at home, at school. So many aspects of our lives have been affected. Especially at my work, it's been very much sort of learn as we go and sort of adapt as we learn more about the virus and as we learn more about how to take care of patients and do it safely. Our practice has really changed quite a bit. So it's been really a challenging time, but also a very rewarding time where there's been so much fear and anxiety. And I feel like I've been able to sort of be at the forefront for our patients throughout the whole experience. So I'm very thankful for that. And I'm thankful that we've been able to stay there for our patients. Although volume certainly did drop off especially during the height of the closures at the beginning of last year. But that's picked back up. And so we're hoping to get people back on track with their screenings and with their routine preventative care.
No, it's a really important point. I think we saw at the height of the pandemic last year, late spring, early summer, how prevention appointments and scans and screenings, whether it was a mammogram or a colonoscopy, had fallen by 80 or 90%. And so it's going to be quite the challenge to, I think, get folks back and screened and make sure that they're on track. And so I suppose that's another conversation, but another topic, getting folks back to screening, but it's something that we're going to have to be laser focused on. I assume you would agree, right?
Absolutely. And I think, people are coming back, and we have a lot of experience now taking care of patients in this new atmosphere. And so I think more and more, and especially now that vaccines are becoming more accessible, patients are feeling more comfortable to come back and get even their routine care.
Yeah. So just a reminder for folks who may have questions, feel free to add it to the chat, either for Dr. Dean or Bob or Julie, and we'll try to get to some questions and I'll work through some questions as well. Dr. Dean, Julie had mentioned, Ohio was one of those states where, we had guidance from the CDC, but each state implemented its prioritization schedule a little bit differently. And Ohio was one of those states that was slow to prioritize cancer patients. And during that period of time, we had fielded a lot of calls and emails and concerns from patients and their caregivers and survivors who were upset about that and who had questions about what they could do. But I'm wondering if you saw similar interest or concern from patients about, the delay in getting a vaccination, or if your patients were relatively happy with the timeline and ease in which they were able to access the vaccine.
I think there was so much anticipation. People were so excited that the vaccine was finally available and it was so close. I think in my experience, the vast majority of my patients wanted to get it as soon as they possibly could. So I know there was some anxiety and some frustration about when is it going to be my turn. And then for those, as they slowly became eligible, it was hard to get those vaccine appointments and it was hard to coordinate those. So absolutely, there was a lot of discussion just about anticipation, where people were so eager to get the vaccine and being so close, but not quite in one of the approved groups to receive the vaccine.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. So close, and yet it felt so far there for a few weeks. But luckily, we're on track now. So I want to talk a little bit about side effects with you, and specifically some of the side effects perhaps you've seen and that other patients have seen that may mimic breast cancer. Can you explain to us what that's all about? Walk us through it, and how common is this?
Sure, absolutely. So, as we have heard quite a bit in the media, any vaccine has the potential to cause mild side effects. And these are things like soreness in the arm, possibly a little bit of achiness, possibly headache, a little bit of fatigue. The one thing that we are hearing a lot about, though, specifically to the question of breast cancer and being a mimic of cancer, is lymph node swelling under the armpit area, or what we call the axillary lymph nodes. We are seeing this a lot. So when the vaccines first started being administered at the end of 2020 and early 2021, it became very apparent pretty quickly that this was a really common side effect. We were seeing a lot of really swollen lymph nodes. And what this basically tells us is that the body is responding exactly in the way that the vaccine has intended it to do. The lymph node enlargement that we're seeing after vaccines is just basically an illustration or a visible representation of your body's immune system doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The reason that it causes so much confusion, especially in breast cancer patients, is that lymph node enlargement can be a sign of something worrisome in the breast. The two most common things that we worry about when we see lymph node enlargement in the axillary region is cancer in the breast or a more systemic cancer, such as lymphoma. The vast majority of the time when we see lymph node enlargement, it is not because of a cancer or anything suspicious. Most of the time, lymph node enlargement is from what we call a reactive process, such as a vaccine, a viral process, any kind of an infection, any kind of stimulus that your body's immune system is responding to can cause those lymph nodes to be enlarged. So we're seeing this a lot in my practice. Just today alone, I probably saw 4 or 5 patients who had lymph nodes from the vaccine. And so what we're doing is, since it is so common and we're seeing this so prominently in both our screening mammogram populations as well as patients who come in because they're feeling something. So we have started just really screening patients and asking the question of, have you had the COVID vaccine? If so, where did you get it? Which arm did you receive it in? When was the dose? And that sort of thing. And that really helps us to interpret the information if we do happen to see lymph node enlargement. That lymph node enlargement, specific to my practice, I do see it very commonly on mammography, but that would really cover, across all of diagnostic radiology for cancer patients who are undergoing surveillance. These lymph nodes under the arm could certainly show up on a CAT scan. For patients who are undergoing a PET scan, you could have the lymph nodes lighting up on a PET scan in the same way. So in those same situations, it's just really important for the radiologist to have that piece of information about, has there been a recent vaccine? Was it the COVID vaccine? And where was that vaccine administered?
Okay. You mentioned, which arm you get the vaccine in. Can that have a big effect on, where these symptoms occur? I mean, you get the shot in the left arm, do these effects typically show up on that side of the body, or can it be on the other side as well?
That's exactly right, Brian. So typically it's what we call ipsilateral, meaning that if you get the vaccine in the left arm, it would be your left axillary lymph nodes that react, and vice versa with the right arm. And that's most commonly what we're seeing. So for cancer patients, what I would advise is, if you're able to do it, have the vaccine on the side opposite the side of your cancer. We heard mention of possibly getting it in the anterior aspect of your thigh. So that's another option. Just because in cancer patients, that lymph node enlargement can definitely cloud the picture for our interpretation and cause a little bit of anxiety and confusion. So doing it on the opposite side or possibly in the thigh could help to alleviate that confusion.
Okay. And for those who have had the vaccine recently, and maybe they just happen to have a screening scheduled or a routine mammogram or something like that, or routine imaging, what's the recommendation? Is this just something to pass on to the doctor, or is it best to wait a little while? What kind of recommendation do you give patients?
So those recommendations actually keep kind of adapting and changing as we've learned more as well. So when we first started seeing this, the Society of Breast Imaging was recommending actually that if we see abnormal lymph nodes on a mammogram screening, for example, we bring those patients back, do diagnostic imaging with ultrasound, and then actually follow those lymph nodes to make sure that they resolve. That's been revised a little bit because it's been such a common side effect. We certainly want to minimize additional unnecessary imaging. And so now what we're really doing is we're mentioning in our reports that we see the lymph nodes. If we have that piece of helpful information that the vaccine has recently been administered, then we basically put that piece in the history so that patients are aware of it, but that they know that they don't have to be anxious about it.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for walking us through that. And then we have a few minutes left here where I wanted to bring in Bob and Julie, and maybe we'll toss around a few questions. And Laura, I guess, or Dr. Dean, I'd like to get your perspective on this too. One question I think is, how was the vaccine uptake in Ohio, and how do we compare maybe to some of the states in the country? Are we generally on track, or do we need to be better? And maybe I'll start here.
If I recall, just the most recent data was that there's around 5.1 million Ohioans who have received at least one dose of the vaccine. Somewhere in the 38 to 43% have received both doses. I actually did listen to a report recently that said that Ohio is sort of in the mid to upper range in terms of that. Some states were much lower, like I think Mississippi was very, very low, and some of the more southern states as well. But I think we're about the mid-range, but it's about half of our folks in the state of Ohio have received at least one dose of the vaccine. That's actually also counting pediatric patients. So the pediatric patient population that's received vaccine, I think it's 290,000, something like that. So.
And speaking of that pediatric population, I assume the trials are ongoing for younger kids, and when do we expect we might see some results and recommendations?
So all of the vaccine manufacturers are conducting 6 months of age to 12 now. So as you know, they did 12 to 15. Now they're doing 6 months to 12. And we expect those results to be published sometime in late fall. So probably you'll see recommendations from ACIP, American Council on the, ACIP folks will probably publish those recommendations in January at some point.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Dean, I guess a similar question to you about uptake and whether or not, as a provider who is counseling and speaking with patients frequently, how do you go about? Are you pleased with uptake generally amongst the patient population, or is this something where you're having to help patients understand the importance of it and walk them through it?
I think there's a little bit of both aspects of that, Brian, but I do think the vast majority of patients that I talk to have been either fully vaccinated or have received one of the doses. For the patients, the vast majority, I think, were very eager to get vaccinated. For my patients who have not been or who are resistant to do it, I think some of the main reasons are, number one, I've had COVID, and so I'm just unclear now, do I need the vaccine? What are the recommendations for me since I've already had COVID? So that's one. Number two, I think people hear a lot about the side effects in the media or from talking to their friends. And so people are nervous about the side effects. They may be nervous about how that might affect their work life or their ability to go to work and function with their families. And then patients who are just nervous about vaccines being new. And so I think those are the three main things that I hear about for patients who are hesitant to get the vaccine. So I think events like this one are really important just to get out the information about, dispelling some of these myths and how important the vaccines are.
Yeah, thank you. And Bob, I want to maybe ask you to, and as comfortable as you feel, looking into the future a bit, prognosticating. I think there's one thing we hear whispers about or questions about is whether or not at some point those who are vaccinated may need to get a booster at some point, right? Kind of re-up those antibodies. Is that something that we think is likely with this shot at some point in the line?
Yeah, actually, there's studies ongoing right now looking at giving half of the dose of the COVID vaccine as a booster. And what they found is that the folks from Moderna have found that there's an exaggerated response, meaning the vaccine is even more effective in terms of the immune response. So my prediction is that in the fall, every fall, there will be recommendation for a COVID vaccine as well as a flu vaccine. And what would be really, really nice if there was a combination product of COVID and flu vaccine. So it's a one-shot deal. I think personally that would improve compliance. Obviously, people could have a choice to do one or the other. But I do believe that just based on the information and what the CDC is going to probably be recommending will be some sort of yearly boost or yearly shot similar to the flu.
And again, maybe perhaps a very basic question, but one I can anticipate folks having is, if you get the Moderna shot now, would you need to get the Moderna booster, or is there some kind of flexibility in the type of shot you get?
Yeah, I don't think that's really known as of yet. I mean, it's obviously an mRNA vaccine. Most folks have been saying in terms of the vaccine, just get vaccinated for an available vaccine. Now that we've got plenty of supply, I mean, from just pharmacologically getting a Moderna and a Pfizer vaccine, it probably wouldn't be any different. Obviously, the J&J vaccine works differently, but I think it would be perfectly safe, several falls from now to get a Moderna vaccine if you got a Pfizer vaccine this fall, for example.
Okay. I know we're doing our best. The scientific process still has to unfold here, so we're just trying to do our best to navigate it. But thank you for taking a shot at that, Julie. I want to bring you in with the question about the concern about some of the legislation pending in the Ohio legislature around vaccinations and whether or not those will be required, or whether or not some employers or organizations can require those, what have you. But if you could just talk to us maybe for a minute about, ways you would recommend people to get involved with ACS-CAN and maybe specifically.
Sure. Thanks, Brian. I think that the lion's share of the folks that are involved with the advocacy part of the American Cancer Society feel like they have something to say to our elected officials. When I first got involved with ACS-CAN, I was just wanting to tell my story. And it wasn't long before I realized that I had more than just a story to tell. I can talk to my elected officials on a one-to-one basis or in a group conversation, and it's not an intimidation kind of thing. It's a very casual conversation from a person to another person, and folks need to understand that we need advocates that will simply tell their passion about cancer, whether they're like Dr. Dean and Bob from the medical profession, whether they're a cancer survivor, whether they're a caregiver, whether they've had friends or coworkers that fought the disease. Something in their heart tells them that they need to take further action. We are there to train you, and we are there to assist you in getting started with some form of advocacy. It can be a little bit of time, or it can be your life's work. It doesn't matter. Reach out to us and make contact with us, and we will help you. As far as moving forward with additional legislation, it doesn't matter whether you're an R or a D when you talk to an elected official. Cancer isn't partisan. It doesn't matter. It affects everyone. And so no matter where you come from or no matter what your feelings are, we look at the issues that cancer patients and cancer survivors deal with. We look at everything through the cancer lens, and the vaccinations and the ongoing issues of COVID are one of those things that we need to continue to consider and continue to be proactive upon.
Yeah, thank you. Certainly, these are not partisan issues. They affect everyone of every background and every political stripe. So I'll make one last call for any questions. I invite folks to put any additional questions in the chat. But Dr. Dean, before I guess ask others for closing thoughts, I want to come to you. This is maybe not a related question, but we did touch on it briefly, and I think it's so important to this to the cancer care community, and that's making sure people are getting screened, especially after some of the delays and disruptions we saw with COVID-19. And I tend to think that this is going to be an all hands on deck approach. I don't think there's any one lever that can be pulled. I think we're all going to have, patients, advocacy community, lawmakers, providers. I think payers. I think we're all going to have to pitch in a little bit. But if you could share your thoughts on what some of the what obstacles remain to getting folks back to screening, how you advise us to work to address any delays and disruptions or backlogs that we still.
I think we're starting to get through or starting to notice some of those backlogs quite a bit now, Brian. It was a little slow to ramp up in the fall, and normally October for us, being Breast Cancer Awareness Month, is a really, really busy crunch time where people are there's a lot of awareness about breast cancer screening. We see a lot of people coming in who haven't been in to be seen before. That really wasn't the case in 2020. And so I think we're now starting to see those patients coming in, whether they're just overdue for a screening that hasn't been done in a year, 2 years, 3 years, or they're unfortunately starting to feel something. So they come in because now they have a cancer that's grown to the size where they can feel it and they have a lump. And so the bottom line is we want patients to know that our healthcare facilities are safe. We want them to come back. The whole goal of screening mammography is to detect cancers when they're as small as they can possibly be detected. That is before they can be felt by the patient or by the patient's doctor. We know that screening mammography saves lives, and the best chance to save those lives is when mammography is performed early and every year starting at the age of 40. So we really want our patients to come back, spread the word, have your friends and relatives make sure that they're up to date. And again, just to emphasize that our healthcare facilities are safe places to be. A vast majority of the people working in my institution have received the vaccine. We have full universal precautions with masking and screening patients as they come in. And so we really want patients to feel safe when they come back to us.
Yeah, thank you. That's an important factor. And, as I've said with Julie, stay tuned. I think there's more for us all to do when it comes to making sure patients are making that return to screening. We're nearing the end of our time here, and I guess I want to just open it up. If there are any other closing comments or things we missed, I invite the panel to leave those with us. And for those who are joining, this link will remain available in our social media feed for you to access the event. And appreciate being here tonight. But any closing thoughts from the panel?
I would say get screened. That's how my cancer was discovered, colon cancer. When I was 50, got screened and had a stage 3C colon cancer, had chemotherapy and surgery. And, if I didn't have that screening, I wouldn't be giving this talk. So.
Brian, I would just encourage folks to go to fightcancer.org and learn about what we do here in Ohio and what we do at the federal level. I can tell you that there's no better feeling than knowing that you've made a difference in the future of cancer care.
No doubt. Okay, well, thank you. I do want to invite everyone to join us, as I mentioned earlier, at next month's event, where we'll be looking at some exciting developments around cancer care and specifically biomarker testing. That will happen on June 17th. I think we have a 3:30 start time on June 17th. And if you want to register, you can do that at fightcancer.org/OH series. June 17th, we'll learn more about biomarker testing. So that is our event for tonight. We again want to thank Guardant for their support of the series, to Robert Weber of Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center, and Dr. Laura Dean of Cleveland Clinic, and Julie Turner for ACSCAN Advocate for all of their help tonight, walking us through this. This tumultuous and stressful process that is COVID-19. But stay safe, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight, and get vaccinated. Have a good night.